All right, good afternoon, Doomberg. Thank you very much for doing this again.
Hey, Trevor, great to be back with you. I really enjoyed our first conversation and looking forward to another fantastic one.
Well, I appreciate your time. I know it is in demand as I think, number one paid finance Substack right now. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's been great. We've held that title for a while, and we would be the first to congratulate somebody who displaces us. But yes, we are the top paid finance Substack in the world, which is crazy and humbling and thrilling and satisfying all at the same time. And so it's as we like to say, when you find what you were meant to be doing in life, just keep doing it. And congratulations to you on your success as well. And we were talking before we hit record about how your podcast has grown. And so it's a really a great time to be a content creator. And if you produce a good product, the audience will find you.
Maybe a lesson on producing undercovered or niche subjects and how the people appreciate that. So
100%. Yeah, the riches are in the niches for sure. It doesn't take much in the way of an audience for you to be able to crank out a living. And so we've certainly picked a bit of a broad topic. Energy is our specialty, but that there was a need for that in the market, and a combination of luck and opportunity and skill has allowed us to exploit that opportunity.
maybe for the listener, I thought for the purposes of today's conversation, we could structure it around the myth of peak oil and then get into why nuclear energy is expanding and growing so much. But for the listener to get an update on Doomberg, I know you left Twitter recently, but it doesn't seem to have affected the business. You're still growing.
Yeah, we're doing all right, holding our own. Substack is growing as an ecosystem. We did leave Twitter last year, mostly because the new owner of Twitter decided that links to Substack would be throttled, and then accounts that posted numerous links to their Substacks in total would be throttled. And we're a very small team, Trevor, and so we have to prioritize our time. Like, we think part of the magic of Doomberg is how small our team is, and I personally was spending a lot of time on Twitter for very diminished returns. I think our engagements on Twitter dropped 95% month over month once the sort of new policies against Substack, which the new owner decided that Substack was his biggest competitor, biggest threat to the platform, which I disagree with, by the way. They're entirely different platforms, but nonetheless, it's his private property and he's free to do what he likes with it. But we're also free to do what we like with our time. And Twitter is still a fascinating place. I visit it every day. It's a great source of inbound information. There's a lot of noise, but there's occasionally some great signal. Like, I think just last night, when the missiles were launched into Israel, for example, you got a very raw, visceral example of the inherent value of Twitter, which is sort of real-time information, videos, some of which you have to wonder if they're real or if they AI. And part of figuring out what's signal, what's noise is part of the fun of being on that platform. And so I still use it every day, but we just don't post on it, don't specifically create content for it. We've moved all of our activities into the Substack ecosystem. They have a bit of a knockoff of Twitter, or they can't really replace Twitter, called Notes, which we post on occasionally. And we're just focused on delighting our paying subscribers and writing our 8 articles a month. And when you have a small team, you have to prioritize your time, and it doesn't make much sense to spend 20-30% of your time on something that is not harvesting any reasonable return. And so we just decided to, for the purpose of the business and maybe even to help other smaller Substacks, to invest our time in the Substack ecosystem.
So leaving Twitter has not been a problem for Doomberg. You're growing.
Well, it depends on your definition of problem. So we have way more than enough beyond our wildest dreams. And one of the things that we have really focused our attention on is making sure that we don't just move the goalposts. So, like, growth for the sake of growth. We've not shrunk. We've been able to mostly maintain and grow slightly from where we were, which is way more than enough. And so who's to complain? When you find what you were meant to be doing in life, you just keep doing it. And this is clearly what we were meant to be doing. We have a blast doing it. It's way more compensation than we could have ever imagined that we would accrue for writing blog articles, basically. But we've seemed to have found a voice and an audience, and a loyal audience that supports our work. And if you're always moving the goalposts in life, then, like, when will you ever declare success? And so we declared that we had enough, and we weren't going to succumb to the disease of more. And so I would suspect that having left Twitter has hurt our business. I think we would be bigger today. We'd probably up to half a million followers on Twitter, which is a pretty sizable account and a valuable media property in its own right. We left it at 250,000, having grown it from nothing through, our own sweat equity and hard work. But after a while, life's too short to worry about such things. And so instead of spending time worrying about what the Twitter algorithm is going to do, I spend my time researching the next piece and delighting our existing paying subscribers.
You can always go back to. It's a pretty easy platform to rejoin or go back to.
Yeah, we just stopped posting. We didn't leave it. I mean, we're still in possession of the account and all of those things. And if Twitter changes, we would go back potentially, but it doesn't look like Twitter's going to change, at least under the current ownership, anytime soon. And so that's fine. And we're patient people. And again, like when you've scored a goal, it's okay to like celebrate the goal. Like, don't worry about immediately trying to score the next one. And we've been very, very blessed, and we've been very consistent in this regard, that we, as the families involved with Doomberg, are intent on cherishing the amazing success that we've been able to earn, and the precious nature of all of our subscribers, and how loyal we are to them, and how we want to delight them with every piece, and respond to every comment, and respond to every email. And since we decided not to grow as a team, there's only so much time in the day that you have, and so Twitter became a very poor return on our time, and so we just at least temporarily removed it.
Maybe just to refresh the listener, you can in fact make a living creating content nowadays via various platforms on the internet, and Doomberg is a case study in how you can do that.
Yeah, 100%. And we have we left Twitter with 250,000 followers. Well, we have over 250,000 emails on Substack, which is basically our, the size of our list. And anybody who's been in the content world knows that an email is like way more valuable than a follower, because it's a more intimate relationship, and you can communicate directly with people. And it's the bar to following is much lower than submitting your email. And we've earned all of those emails, and a portion of them are paying subscribers, and it's way more than enough. Like I said, Trevor, like it's what's the point of succeeding if you can't enjoy it? And whether it be on YouTube or Substack or Patreon or Twitter or TikTok, if you produce content that delights people, there are ways to monetize it, as you're proving.
Yeah. Yes. Doomberg has been a big help for my own podcast and guiding it. So very much appreciated the advice you gave.
Yeah, no, look, we're also big believers in giving. Giving is infinite NPV. It costs nothing to give. The world is way, way big enough for as many people who want to get in the boat and row. And we have hosted probably a dozen Substack authors personally in real life to show them how we did it and how we could help them. And some of them have made some substantial strides, and it gives us great pride to see that. It's just a superior way to live. And so, as you can tell, we have a certain bit of a Zen philosophy on our team. And it's just a great way to get up every morning and be excited about what you do. Like I get to be on the internet all day for a living.
You get paid for it. Yep.
Pinch me. Right. I keep waking up wondering, like, who's going to take this all away from us?
Yeah. And I guess nowadays you can make a career out of making content. Again, for the listener, that is something that you could, I guess, do forever as a career.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, if you're good enough at it. And, product market fit, the market will tell you. One of the things about the content world, that it is very much a meritocracy. So if you produce good stuff and people are willing to compensate you for that, and then you have a mindset of continuous improvement around everything that you do, we would like to say excellence by every measure. Like, we live and die by every typo. When we publish a piece, it's like a very high pucker factor for the first 30 minutes, because if there is a typo, it's going to be found, and somebody's going to email us or leave us in the comments. And that's about like once every 10 pieces now that we have a typo. Worse than a typo is a statement of fact that is wrong, which can be very damaging to the brand. And so we do an awful lot of fact checking, but no matter how much fact checking you do, as many facts as we state in our 8 pieces a month, you're inevitably going to get something wrong. That's a very devastating error to make. And, if you don't care about it, then, it's not worth it. And so we're 325 articles in, and every article, our objective is that every article feels like it's the best one we ever wrote when we hit send. And for sure, we believe 100% of the things we say when we press send, but we keep an open mind for being dynamic and changing facts and changing news flows and stuff. And so, but we're on a treadmill, like at 8 pieces a month. We're research, writing, editing, publishing, promoting, and defending a piece every 4 days. And when I'm get done with you today, I'm going to try to finish up the piece that I hope will be submitted to edit tomorrow for maybe a Sunday publication. And we just published yesterday, and we have our monthly Doom Zooms for our pro tier, which we take very seriously, 45-minute presentations on deep dives on all things energy and other things that might be of interest to our subscribers. And so, but none of this is work, right? I'm old enough to remember when I would sit in meetings where 80% of my day were wasted, and now all I do is this.
Yep.
And if all you do, the old, it's cliche, but like if you do what you love for a living, you'll never work a day in your life. This is not work. I mean, talking to you on this podcast and then finishing up and getting ready to finish a piece for my overnight writing session so that the editor can have it first thing in the morning, and we get it loaded and do the fact check and do the typo checks and all those other things that we do. Our 25-point operations plan for each piece.
Mm-hmm.
Got it down to a bit of a science, and so it's kind of fun.
I'm sure you thought about this, but there's a cliche where you need to build an asset that earns, so you don't have to be there all the time to avoid the treadmill effect. But how do you think about that with Doomberg and creating content? Have you tried to move away from that at all, or how do you?
No, this is not a treadmill. So this is what I mean. That's a feeling you get when you're doing something that isn't what you were meant to be doing, but you're doing it for the money.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing what we were meant to be doing. The editor-in-chief of Doomberg is an outstanding editor and grew up dreaming of being an editor one day, but went on to corporate and had like a quote unquote real career until we built this business together. And hand in glove, like I was meant to research and write these pieces, and that person was meant to edit them and make them like perfect. Put that little bit of a finesse on the pieces. Our pieces are very tightly edited. So it doesn't feel like work. And there's multiple kinds of businesses. There's businesses where you sell your time, like you're a consultant or you're a construction contractor. There's only so many hours you personally can work, and you sell your time and you make some profit. That's capped. There are businesses when you sell other people's time. So you start a construction company and you try to find a half a dozen carpenters, and then you go out into the market and make sure that they're fully, deployed, and you take your cut of their time. But then there are businesses like this one, which is where we scale our time. So if we get another 1,000 paying subscribers, there's no incremental work, really. And so if you're doing what you love, but you scale your time. Now, look, if we get another 1,000 subscribers, that's more emails and responses and comments. And so there's some work, but it's not proportional.
Yeah.
It's not capped. So I love YouTube, for example. I love all content creators. So we study all content creators. It's just doing it for a living now and making sort of breakthrough, life-changing business success in this field. We've become a bit obsessed with studying it and how do other people do it and what business models do they have. And I'm really fascinated by YouTube. Like there's a YouTube channel that I watch for a guy who specializes in fixing small engines.
Yeah. Yeah.
And mostly generators, electric generators. And this guy, like when he publishes a video, the brand of that video to me, the gut instinct induced in me, which is the definition of a brand, is, ooh, I get to watch that later, right? And the guy finds a generator on Facebook and he pays $50 for it, and he's got a whole warehouse full of parts, and he cobbles it together and he fixes it with his own hands, his own brains, and then maybe he sells it for 500. But the video is what's paying him, right? Like if you get 1 million views on YouTube, is roughly $10,000 in Google ad money, and he's making way more money on the videos than he is on the engine repairs. But the engine repairs are just like what he loves to do. His channel is James Condone, if anybody's interested. It's not really well branded or marketed, but they're just really well done. And like I'm fascinated by this guy. Like he's got almost 200,000 subscribers on YouTube, and we're talking about like being able to make a living, right? And his like most popular video has 4.1 million views. I just pulled it up, and a 4 million view video is worth $40,000. And he made a lot more in the video than he did finding that old generator, repairing it, and selling it on Facebook Marketplace. Yeah. But like there's a market for it, and he's really good at it, and I admire it, and I want to know why he's successful versus other ones that are probably just as good at small engine repair aren't. And that's a very fascinating problem and a very fascinating challenge to understand. And I do believe as AI saturates more and more of our life, that which is authentically and distinguishably human is going to become ever more valuable. Mm-hmm. one of the things we've learned about this business is the primary reason why people pay to subscribe to you, for example, which is a different business model than the ad model. We were on a subscription model. The dominant reason is they like you. They like your writing, they like your jokes, they like the captions in our pictures, or they hear us on a podcast and they think, well, that's a person that I wouldn't mind having more of in my life. If we were exceptionally informative, but sort of difficult to listen to, or an unpleasant personality, or we were caustic in our writing, no matter how valuable you are, people just don't want to pay you. Like, I think liking the person they're supporting is sort of table stakes, and that's really sort of an authentically human interaction. Like, I use ChatGPT. It's a very powerful service. I don't like it. I don't have like a bond to it, but our subscribers know that every email gets responded to, every comment gets responded to. And it's us, a small team, imperfect as we are, trying our best, putting it all out there, and doing our level best to be provocative without being polarizing, to be funny without being silly, and to teach without being self-indulgent. And those are the three great attributes that we strive for. And I think the market is telling us that we've done a reasonable job of achieving those things.
It's a competitive game making content, but the attributes of code and media are $0. It's the marginal cost of reproduction is zero. So if you have popular content, you can make good money.
Yeah, and then by the subscription model, people prepay you. Like, there's no cash conversion cycle. Now it can accumulate a bit of unearned revenue, and if you have to fulfill, but it's not like you're a business that has to invest a lot of money to make something and then go and collect in 90 days, right? People will prepay you. And so, like, in accounting terms, it's literally unearned revenue until you fulfill. And we commit to 84 articles a year, which we always try to exceed. That would be 7 articles a month. We averaging more like 7.75. And that's the fulfillment. So if you're going to pay $300 to be an annual subscriber to Doomberg, you prepay that up front, and that's great business. Like, and Substack gets its piece, and Stripe gets its piece, and we're happy to pay them because they're great partners. There'd be no Doomberg without Substack. There'd be no business without Stripe. And so we're very proud to partner with those two great businesses. And I think this is where the world is going. Like, as computers take over things, that which is uniquely human is going to be ever more valuable. And I'll just leave you with one more example. I know we're probably talked about this longer than you intended, but it's a fascinating topic. Take chess. The game of chess has been conquered by computers. It has not been solved by computers, but it has been conquered by computers. And what do I mean by that? There is no human alive that could even draw against a mediocre chess engine today. Magnus Carlsen, who's the greatest chess player who ever played, was a child savant, 5-time world champion. He's not the reigning world champion only because he decided not to compete for it in the last cycle. He literally could not score a draw against a pedestrian engine running on your iPhone today. Chess has never been more popular. And people aren't watching computers play each other. People are watching humans play each other, different time formats, old grandmaster, young prodigy, classical chess over the board versus speed chess on the computer. They're very different games. Bullet chess, which is just like almost impossible for an average chess player like me to watch. But like Hikaru Nakamura has millions of subscribers on YouTube and is making way more money creating content than he ever could have imagined winning as a professional chess player. The vast majority of chess players don't make any money, but the people who do chess content well make an enormous amount of money. This is where the world is going. Like, the drama of the blunder at the last moment, and these two players don't like each other, but they're forced to play each other on Title Tuesday. And there's a whole ecosystem, a whole soap opera of entertainment, these dopamine hits that are being distributed to people who love chess and love a good drama. And the fact that the boring computed perfection of chess is being rejected by the market gives me hope for this sort of similar phenomenon expanding. And this is why we're big fans of Substack, because I think they are winning the the network effect war for writing on the internet. We support authors we like, whose writing entertains us. And when we occasionally find a typo that doesn't diminish their work, even though they may be horrified by it in the same way that we are. So this is where the world is going. And as we have more and more free time, as robots and computers do more and more, the marginal human to human dollar is going to be spent on uniquely human products. And this is, I think, a mega trend that we've been very fortunate enough to catch early on a platform that we joined early that we think is going to win.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We could probably have a whole conversation about that, but
seems like we are.
We'll move on to a
Sure.
couple of topics, but that's a great update on Doomberg. So I guess to get your insights on peak oil, why is that a myth in the short term?
Well, it's a myth in the long term too. In fact, the longer the term is, the greater the myth of peak oil is. To answer the question, you have to take a step back and ponder sort of what we call the four laws of energy. So the first law of energy is life, right? I mean, your standard of living is defined by how much energy you get to harness and actually waste in order to impose order on your local environment. You can't defeat entropy without wasting heat. And right angles aren't spontaneous in nature. And your standard of living is defined by how much energy you get to waste, how much heat you get to waste in order to impose order on your local environment. And an interesting aspect of humans, distinctly human things, as we were just talking about, is that all humans everywhere want a higher standard of living. Like the 7 billion people in the global south who live at a fraction of the standard of living that we do are all aspiring to sit right next to us in the same chair. And who are we to blame them, right? So then the second law of energy is a really important one, which is energy is fungible. So you don't really care where the electrons come from when you flip on the light switch. Like we can pretend to care, and we're rich enough that we can say, for example, desire that some of those electrons come from solar as opposed to coal. But really, what matters is the lights come on. And so whether that electricity comes from a nuclear power plant, coal plant, a natural gas plant, a wind turbine, a solar panel, people fundamentally don't care. The third law of energy is that primary energy prices are inelastic. So if you have a glut, prices crash. And if you have even a slight shortage, prices skyrocket because energy is life and everybody wants more life. All humans everywhere want a higher standard of living, always. That's a very powerful phenomenon that plays on the second law, which is that energy is fungible, because it doesn't take much in the way of price differences between the different primary energy sources for arbitrage forces to take over. So if natural gas is dirt cheap and oil is really expensive, people switch the engines, which we'll get to in a second. And then the fourth law of energy is that the energy producers are technology powerhouses with no discipline. So they are amazing, giant, magical deflationary machines that are able to convert resources into reserves at an exponential rate. And they're always inventing new ways to do that. And left to their own devices, they'll drill themselves into oblivion. Like they have no discipline. The market history on this is very clear. Drill, baby, drill. These people want to drill. So when you combine all four of those, what you end up with is a situation where any price spikes in oil are immediately met with developments in technology that put a cap on those price spikes. We're swimming in hydrocarbons. Like this is a great fallacy invented, I think, by the oil companies 100 years ago to convince people that maybe there might be a shortage one day, so they'd pay a premium for it. Just to give an example, there's a mountain of natural gas in North America, like way more natural gas than we could ever use. And what do we do with hydrocarbons like oil? We burn them, which creates heat, and then we do work with that heat. Because energy is fungible, people don't really care if they're burning gasoline in their car or natural gas, as long as it's convenient and cheap. And technologies exist to switch between the hydrocarbons. And even though we think there's an enormous amount of conventional oil in the ground, layered on top of that is the fact that we have a mountain of natural gas and we can just switch the engines. And China's doing that. And because energy prices are inelastic, it doesn't take much in the way of switching for prices to remain under control. And if you look at the number of barrels of oil an ounce of gold will buy you, it's never been higher. Like, go look at that chart and tell me on that chart where cheap oil is manifesting. It's not. But even conventionally, like, we did a piece on Vaca Muerta in Argentina, which is a giant shale play. Political reasons, it's not being developed today. But, the world consumes 100 million barrels a day of oil. And that grows at about 1 to 2% a year. And it will forever. Like, we will be producing 150 million barrels of oil. There's no such thing as peak demand for oil because the gating function of demand is supply, because everybody everywhere wants a higher standard of living. And oil is a magical resource that allows you to do a lot of work with very small amount of material. And Vaca Muerta in Argentina, where Malay is, doing this shock therapy on the Argentinian economy. I saw an expert who's been basically living in this shale resource for the better part of 10 years. I saw him on a podcast. His name escapes me now. But he said that the resource itself, forget all the constraints, like they don't have the roads and they don't have the rigs and they don't have the government stability and all that stuff. Those are all solvable problems. The resource itself could easily produce 5 to 6 million barrels a day for a very long time. It's like hundreds of meters thick, the pay layer. And we just have that in reserve. California has at least as much oil and gas underground as Texas does. Politically, it chooses not to exploit those things. At $200 oil, that politics would be wiped aside. Like, the Gavin Newsoms of the world would be gone. And we would elect people who would exploit those resources to bring those prices back down. Canada, Montney Formation. I mean, the avalanche of hydrocarbons in North America is insane. The shale revolution has radically altered the world, but there will always be another shale revolution. And so I'll leave you with another data point on engine switching. Natural gas, dirt cheap. Like, literally in the US right now, natural gas is trading for, $18 a barrel of oil, energy equivalent. Okay, that's a huge arbitrage. Oil at 70 versus natural gas at 18. Engines will be switched, and a couple of percentage points of engine switching is all it takes. In China, Bloomberg reported in April that 30% of the new long-haul trucks sold in China in April were powered by natural gas, LNG. Mostly. And I didn't know, like, you could super chill natural gas on a truck and it would be economical, but the Chinese have figured it out, and the Chinese move at China speed. But there's another reason why they want to do that, because when you burn diesel in the big cities, in Shanghai and Berlin, Beijing, Berlin, Shanghai and Beijing, PM 2.5 is a measurement that the Chinese Communist Party cares a lot about. That's a particulate matter, 2.5 microns. And the US embassy likes to publish those numbers, and all the Chinese citizens use their VPNs to look at the number they're not supposed to and see how different it is than the official Communist Party's measurement of the pollution in those cities on that day. There are two big drivers of that pollution: coal at power plants and diesel in trucks. Well, they're switching from diesel to natural gas, and natural gas is really cleanly burning. Like, we cook in our homes with no special ventilation using natural gas. You wouldn't light oil on fire in your kitchen and just sit there and absorb those fumes and that pollution. And so once they switch, that demand is gone. And I think, like, Goldman Sachs, somebody estimated that 500,000 barrels a day of diesel and bunker fuel have been displaced in long-haul trucking and in the container shipping industries. And that's a trend that's growing. It's cheaper. It burns cleaner. And once you've switched the engines, why would you ever switch back? And so we're seeing it faster than even we predicted. Another piece that we're writing that'll come out this weekend is on how natural gas will change the artificial intelligence world and vice versa. Like, if you have a endless supply of clean burning cheap fuel, the data center companies are going to gorge on natural gas in the US. And they're going to, I noticed that Oracle just committed to invest $6.5 billion in Malaysia. Well, Malaysia is the 4th largest LNG exporter in the world. They got a ton of natural gas. Why would you chill it and put it on a boat when you could just put a data center there and use it directly? Save the $6 to $10 worth of logistics costs of moving it around the oceans per million BTU. So this is coming. Like, you're going to see Saudi Arabia take its enormous natural gas resources that are undeveloped. It wants to be an AI center. The US, of course, Russia, I wouldn't underestimate Russia's potential as an AI power because it has a limitless supply of natural gas. So natural gas is going to be the fuel that bridges AI to nuclear. And I know you want to talk about nuclear too, so maybe that's a great way to bridge into it.
Well, before we get to nuclear, one question I had was anyone who looks at the data can see reserves are growing and there's basically no supply. But for example, last week, the Canadian energy minister, the guy in charge of energy in Canada, theoretically stated that we are heading towards peak oil.
Well, he's an idiot. So let's be clear.
Probably this year. So
Yeah, he's an idiot. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, he is not a person that any serious analyst in the energy sector should be paying attention to.
So the reason I bring it up though is where do you think that comes from?
That comes from wishful thinking and the desire on the part of a small subset of Malthusians who believe there's too many people and we can't afford to feed them.
Right.
And so they're trying to get ahead of that. He has a history with Greenpeace, of course, and Greenpeace is a hotbed of Malthusian pessimism.
Mm-hmm.
And he is playing to a different audience. The gating function of energy production in Canada is regulatory red tape. Mm-hmm. The resource base, as we wrote in a piece called After Trudeau, which frankly can't come fast enough, the resource base on a time period measured in decades should be modeled as effectively infinite. Yeah. Canada has an enormous amount of light oil, heavy oil, natural gas liquids, natural gas. The only thing that is gating that production is politics. Mm-hmm. And in the event of a real crisis, which the proponents of peak cheap oil would say is just around the corner, well, the presence of that crisis will be its solution. It'll be the genesis of the solution. We will wipe away the Stephen Gillibrandts. Was it Stephen? I know his first name is Stephen, but I don't pay too much attention to unserious people that I haven't put his last name to memory. He's just an unserious person. What does he know? About what industry is capable of. Just like 2 months ago, Chevron announced this massive breakthrough in offshore drilling, 20,000 PSI pressures now that they can drill for oil. That opens an enormous, resource base to be converted into reserves. Mm-hmm. A fascinating thing. If you look at the U.S. Department of Energy data mm-hmm. on the proven reserves of the U.S. oil and gas industry for both oil and gas, mm-hmm. It's basically always 11 times last year's production.
Yeah.
And as production grows, the reserves grow, right? Like that's an economic term and a political term. It's not a geological term. We are swimming in hydrocarbons. And when we switch enough engines to methane, natural gas, and we basically, so we wrote a few controversial pieces on the topic, and people that aren't quite so open-minded as we are had some objections to them. We did a pro talk for our, we have a pro tier and we do a monthly webinar. And we did an entire presentation on the changing definition of oil. And we settled on the following definition. Oil is any hydrocarbon that finds its way into a refinery. Mm-hmm. And the definition of oil is undergoing a semantic shift. And all hydrocarbons eventually will trade for the same price, corrected for logistics. And that is a massive force of arbitrage, a grinding force of arbitrage that would be very foolish to bet against. Mm-hmm. And your environment minister has no concept of how the world really works. Yeah. And his presence in the Canadian Liberal government, or the minority government that Trudeau has eked out with the help of Mr. Singh and the NDPs, his presence is testimony to the luxury of being rich. He's an unserious person. And the moment that a serious crisis would befall Canada, he would be swept aside into the dustbin of unserious people where he so thoroughly deserves to be.
Yeah. The critic would say that it's usually people who have interests in the energy industry that promote it, but it only takes one look at the rising growth in demand and the infinite reserves to back up the argument. I don't understand where the breakdown in.
And look, the oil and gas industry is a deflationary monster. Like once a technology is developed, it spreads.
Yeah.
We've not really internationalized shale yet. Argentina's kind of the first test case. That shale is producing 370,000 barrels a day today, and an enormous amount of natural gas, which is basically trapped. And so, you're going to see floating offshore LNG facilities, and you're going to see a pipeline built to Brazil, or even reversed. I think they'll just reverse the flows. But that resource could handle 5 to 6 million barrels a day. It'll probably peak out at between 1.5 and 2 just because of the politics and all those other things. But these political constraints are politics. These are not, in the face of a sufficient crisis, they would be swept away. California, that's, like it's illegal to frack in the UK today, and they're in the middle of an energy crisis. Well, those two things are related.
Yeah.
Like if you're not going to develop your own resources, then have fun starving.
Yeah.
Luckily, Alberta, British Columbia, there's a bit of a provincial authority, and same thing with the US, Texas and Louisiana and Oklahoma and New Mexico have a little bit more control over their natural resources. Even the contemplation of restricting energy production is a luxury of the rich. No poor country is doing that. Indonesia's not doing that. China's not doing that. Brazil's not doing that. Pakistan would certainly not do that. Bangladesh is not doing that. Everybody else in the world who's not yet rich understands what the foundation of being rich is. And the foundation of being rich is plentiful energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, maybe that transitions into the role of nuclear. I think Doomberg had a piece out a week or two ago on how it's reaching an inflection point. So I guess the question is, why is nuclear starting to get to that wider acceptance?
A couple of factors. First of all, it is the most superior form of energy. And if we wanted to, we could put the oil and gas companies out of business and focus exclusively on nuclear. We have a limitless supply of uranium. The technologies are solved. The criticisms of nuclear are fake. Every energy source comes with its own trade-offs. We could literally do everything we wanted with nuclear using can-do technology, which is really amazing suite of nuclear technologies that's decades old that requires basically no more refining. We just choose not to, and there's some conspiracies out there that the oil and gas industry was behind some of the propaganda around anti-nuclear movements and the Malthusian aspects that are the foundations of those movements. But people are beginning to recognize, especially in light of the AI boom, that not all electricity is created equal. To compare the quote unquote cost of baseload nuclear power with intermittent solar and wind is like comparing bananas to a bag of potato chips. I mean, they're both food, I suppose, but they're vastly different products with different attributes. And with this announcement from Microsoft that they're going to finance the reopening of 3 Mile Island's remaining unmelted down nuclear reactor, I think that's a real milestone, like a shock to the system. And then, as we wrote about, perhaps even more importantly, around the same time, a group of the 14 largest banks in the world got together in New York on the sidelines of Climate Week, no less, to decree that from their perspective, the financing of new nuclear is at least as sustainable as the financing of wind and solar, which is a breakthrough and one that is not to be diminished. And that the old dying voices of the Malthusians from the 50s and 60s are finally being brushed aside. And so if you care about carbon, there is no superior alternative to nuclear. And even if you don't care about carbon, uranium is so energy dense, and engineers can do magic with high energy density materials, that this is actually the way to go. Meltdown risk is a made up canard, and especially with newer designs, even with like old technology. But most importantly, nuclear waste is the biggest canard that we've ever been sold. Less than 5% of the embodied energy in a uranium fuel rod is used before we decide to call it waste. In reality, all we need to do is run that uranium through a fast breeder reactor, and we could recycle that waste and make it into fresh fuel. There's a minor problem with that, which is it creates some plutonium, which then triggers all manner of nuclear proliferation risk, which could easily be handled. I mean, everything comes with trade-offs, but all the quote unquote nuclear waste sitting around the United States today is actually a gift to future engineers, because there's a huge amount of fuel value sitting there that can be easily reprocessed. So not only are we swimming in an enormous amount of uranium, all of the fuel that the spent fuel, quote unquote, from the existing fleet in the US, say, of the 90 reactors that are still operating, that quote unquote nuclear waste is actually just potential energy to be extracted at a future date when we're not worried about proliferation risk because we've Star Trek society and we're all unified. The nationalism and the wars that we see today are not necessarily going to persist with us forever. And this brings me to like another point, like fusion is just a made up solution to problems that don't exist. Like we don't need fusion. Fission is enough. Fusion purports to solve two problems that are fake, which is meltdown risk and the quote unquote nuclear waste problem. We don't need it. We have it. It's fission. Like, let's be adults. Let's manage a recycle system in a way that limits proliferation, and let's design these plants so that even in the 1 in 10,000 chance that they melt down, that nobody actually is hurt. And I'll leave you with a final data point, which just kind of blows our minds. Everybody says that hydroelectricity is renewable and green and good, right? Like in the 70s in China, there was a freak storm and a huge dam collapsed. And estimates are that somewhere between 50,000 and 250,000 people died. I don't care if it's 10,000. Like, we didn't go around the world and dismantle all of the hydroelectricity dams because of a freak accident in China that killed an enormous amount of people. But Fukushima, which was a freak accident, a tsunami of historic proportions, the grand total of direct deaths attributable to the Fukushima part of that disaster, not the tsunami part, but the Fukushima part, is 1. And that person died of cancer like a few years later. Like, there are trade-offs in life. Like, there are more people who've died being trapped on a wind turbine when it caught fire than have died from Fukushima. You can't find a single human on Earth who has been injured by nuclear waste. We've looked. Like, how many 9s in the probability do you need before the benefits of nuclear energy outweigh the astonishingly tiny risks involved, right? How many people die of or have suffered with asthma because of the gasoline that we burn, or lead in gasoline? What a big scandal that was over the decades, or hydroelectric dams collapsing. This dam that may have collapsed in North Carolina, it wasn't primarily a hydroelectric dam, but they did produce some electricity. There is no technology without its trade-offs, and the word trade-off is missing from our energy discussion and our debate. Like, let's put them on board. Like, what does nuclear energy bring? A, B, C, D, E. And what are the risks, and how do we abate those? What does oil bring? What does gas bring? What does coal bring? What does solar bring? What does wind bring? Like, the fact that you can operate a nuclear power plant with 94, 95% capacity factors versus maybe the sun doesn't shine at night and it's cloudy for a few weeks. Like, those are trade-offs. They're attributes. We should measure them. We should prioritize them, and we should make an intelligent decision, not based on emotion, but based on logic.
Yeah, I'm not a nuclear expert by any means, but what I have read is that the criticism is that the tail risk for nuclear is too high, and that it takes one meltdown. But it sounds like
okay. So Chernobyl happened, right? Okay, talk me through the consequences. Like, how many people actually died?
Yeah.
If you go visit there today, and you can, it's basically a museum today. You can go and visit it. Fukushima happened. How many people died? When a dam collapses, do we talk about tail risk for hydroelectricity? When you kill countless caribou in Quebec because of the St. James Bay project, when you completely terraform vast hundreds of square miles of beautiful Quebec nature for the benefit of exporting electricity to New York so they could greenwash themselves and have basically a giant battery in Quebec so they can install some wind turbines, even though they foolishly shut down Indian Point. Like, we don't talk about trade-offs. Like, what about the indigenous people that lived in Quebec and for whom the now flooded territory has been robbed from them? Like, these are all things to consider. Look, Quebec has a very quote-unquote green grid. Ontario, through a combination of nuclear and hydro, produces basically no carbon emissions and runs a fine grid. Those are all trade-offs, and I'm happy to have the discussion, but let's not have unrealistic expectations of nuclear. Yeah. Like, what's the issue with nuclear in Canada? CANDU is an amazing technology. Like, if I were the Prime Minister of Canada, they would never have me as Prime Minister of Canada for a variety of reasons, but I would do a nuclear renaissance, like even Alberta. Like, let's just put CANDUs all over the country.
Yeah.
Um, it's just an amazing technology. I'd say the CANDU reactor technology is the leading nuclear technology in the world. And why the US, for example, just doesn't adopt it as a standard, and we build up the supply chains in collaboration with our Canadian friends. It is a mystery to me. Like, the solution is there. We know how to do it. Like, I've driven through Ontario. The creeks aren't glowing green, and all the people I've met only have two eyes.
Yeah.
Like, this is not, the 2/3 of the electricity in Ontario is generated from CANDU nuclear power reactors. And if we figured this out 30, 40, 50 years ago when Canada and France installed all of these, like, why can't we do this today? The Chinese are doing it.
Mhm.
So that, is what it is. It's part of the frustrations and part of the fun of being involved in the energy debate.
The phrase that was in the Doomberg piece was the common knowledge game. What is that, and why? How is it applying to nuclear? Why is it taking off now?
So first of all, that's a Ben Hunt phrase from epsilon theory, and we acknowledge that and link to his work in the piece. The common knowledge game is, I'll give you an example. So the ultimate common knowledge game moment, sort of to speak in quantum physics, when the wave function collapsed. In the presidential debate, the first presidential debate. So, like, any objective observer knew that, Joe Biden was not playing with a full deck of cards for a very long time. Even in the 2020 election, it was clear that there were some signs. But by the 2024 debate, it's very clear that this man was decaying at an alarming rate. Like,
Yep.
he was he is. If you watch old videos of Joe Biden speaking on the Senate floor, and then you compare them to Joe Biden answering questions from reporters today, it's stark, it's sad. And as as a son of a parent who suffered with a very similar to disease to what I suspect Joe Biden is suffering from, the signs were abundantly clear.
Yeah.
But everyone just kind of pretended as though this wasn't real until the debate. And as Ben Hunt wrote brilliantly in his piece, that was a common knowledge game moment where suddenly everybody else knew that everybody else knows. Like, I knew that this guy was, basically Joe Cadaver. And you kind of suspected that everyone else also knew too, but enough people were faking it and pretending that it wasn't actually happening, that it wasn't like you weren't free. Most people weren't free to just say to each other, see, like, yeah, we've all seen this.
Right.
That's a common knowledge moment. And we think that the 14 big banks coming out and saying the obvious, nuclear is the most superior source of energy we have. Oil and gas and solar and wind have their attributes that in certain niche applications might make them useful. Oil and gas in many more applications than solar and wind, but that's our view. But, like, by far the most superior source of energy in the world is nuclear. It's not even close. We have an infinite supply of it. We know what to do. There's no technical inventions. If civilian nuclear energy were invented today, it would be hailed as a civilization-saving discovery. It was discovered in the 40s.
Yeah.
Like, we know how to do this. We're choosing not to. But suddenly, when all the big banks, Citi, Bank of America, Goldman, come out and say it all together, suddenly everyone knows that everyone else now knows that it's okay to support nuclear. That the Sierra Clubs of the world and the Greenpeaces of the world may chatter about it, but there's enough people now on the side of logic and science and sanity that it's safe for everyone to move to the other side of the boat all at once. Mm-hmm. And as much as people may have had quiet reservations about Joe Biden, it suddenly became safe for everyone at the Democratic Party to say something about it, because they knew they can't have this guy stand because they were going to get wiped out. Like, the fact that he's still president blows my mind. Like, how can you be unqualified to run but qualified to be? Mm-hmm. Right? So that's the common knowledge game. And that debate was a watershed moment. And we believe the announcement of the big banks of their full-throated support for nuclear, in its own way, was a very analogous watershed moment for the future of nuclear energy. And the last of the Malthusians will be wiped away, your environment minister included. Wandering about, worrying about peak cheap oil, as crazy as that is, as uninformed as that is, as ignorant as that is, as disqualifying as that is for a person like him to hold public office. You're one election away from no longer having to listen to him.
Yeah, a quote I also read recently was the world has never actually run out of any resources, which kind of supports that too.
Yeah, look, we are but a gnat. We're a gnat on a pimple on a horse,
Yeah.
as measured by the earth. The arrogance of assuming that we
Yes.
will deplete the world is insane. But when you're rich and you run out of real things to worry about, it's human nature to invent a few fake things to ponder.
Well, that's probably, I think, a good place to leave it. Thank you for your thoughts on why peak oil is a myth and where nuclear is at.
Yeah, that was great. And also, the creator economy.
Also, an update on the creator economy. I know a lot of people appreciate that, myself included. So,
Yeah, no, it was great, Trevor. I really appreciate it.
if there's anything else you want to add, we can. But otherwise, we'll end the
Yeah,
conversation
you
there.
can just find all of our work at Doomberg.com. And like I say, I enjoyed it. I can't believe it's been a year. Looking forward to coming back maybe a little bit sooner next time. And congrats to you as well. And it's nice to see other creators finding their niche and doing their best and putting out good content. And you've certainly done that. So a real pleasure to be here. The hour flew right by, almost an hour, I guess. And yeah, it was great. Thanks, Trevor.
Well, thank you. Everyone can find you, just basically Google Doomberg and you will find the Substack.
Yeah.
So
Doomberg.com. We ejected a squatter from that domain name. It was a good trade for him, but we own Doomberg.com now. We're still on Substack, but if you just go to Doomberg.com, you'll find all of our articles, our pro tier, our podcast appearances. It's all there in one-stop shopping, as we like to say. And so yeah, it's been a blast, and looking forward to the next time.
thank you. We'll end it there.